Well, hello, Bethel Nation. Once again, it is Cam.
It's Chad.
Chad, I got you
got
there. I got you there. So,
Got
Chad, we have been working our way through the Sermon on the Mount,
Chipping away at it.
and we are really getting into some heavy topics here. Topics that really, really hit close to home for a lot of us, a lot of families. But we want to kind of unpack some of this, talk about it a little bit. And so, Chad, I think you're going to pick up with chapter 5, verse 31.
31.
Today. Yeah.
It says this: "It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery as well."
Wow.
Now, you have to understand a little bit of what the certificate of divorce thing is. At this point in time in biblical world, and when a man marries a woman, she becomes kind of his property.
It's a patriarchal society.
For lack of a better term, she becomes this property of his. And what's happening is, if this man decides to divorce this woman and she becomes divorced, she loses basically all rights and everything that she has. She becomes destitute on her own. Everybody kind of disowns her. She has this mark upon her because she's divorced, and everything changes for her. And so it's very easy at this point in time to divorce a woman and just kind of leave her sitting there and like an object, like an item with nothing. And so Moses in the law comes up with this idea of certificates, so that this woman has the opportunity to move on and have some rights.
And remarry.
And so that's what this certificate talk about. And if you want a further in-depth look as what Jesus is talking about, Matthew 19, he really kind of goes into this. But for me, this idea here, it echoes the idea that we've been talking about every devotion so far as we've gotten to this talk about the law. And it's this idea of community and how we move towards reconciliation and how we move towards this idea of love. And I don't know about you, Cam, but love and really loving someone, that's hard work.
It is hard work.
And I think people... I know when Sarah and I got married, at the beginning of our marriage, people were like, "Oh, have you had your first fight? Or have you done this?" And I was always like, "Oh, we're in love. We would never do that." And what you find out is that when you're living with someone and you love someone, it takes work sometimes. It takes moving and getting up and doing. And it's the same idea as these other things. It's the same idea as this objectifying that we just talked about in adultery yesterday. It's the same idea as reconciliation that we talked about with anger and murder. And for me, I see this same cup that Jesus is coming with, saying, hey, this is all in this together. You think, okay, now you could just divorce a woman and leave her. Okay, now there's certificates. And so she has some rights, but you think that it's just about this disposing of people and moving on. Mm-hmm. But really what he's seeking here, in my opinion, is about reconciliation and coming through and moving towards a reconciliation. And, I think this subject for both of us is an interesting subject. My parents are... My parents are divorced, and it caused some issues in my childhood. But at this point in their lives, there's been a lot of reconciliation. I think between both parties. We do things as a giant family. I think of birthday parties and things that we've had for the grandkids and ways that we've moved on. And God has provided healing in the midst of what it is. So for me, this passage, he may be going right at divorce, but I think it's a lot deeper, and it's more seated in this idea of who we are as a Christian community.
Yeah, and I also think that it kind of goes back to some degree to that level of the leveling of the playing field.
Yeah.
So in the previous few verses, 27 through 30, Jesus says, if you've lusted after somebody, you've committed adultery. And here he starts talking about adultery. And so again, nobody can really sit in a place of judgment, unless you've never lusted after anybody.
Yeah.
And if you live long enough, I don't know. But Chad, here's one other thought that I've had about this. Jesus at the beginning of chapter 5 or close to it said that we are called to be salt.
Yeah.
And we're called to be light, which means we are meant to be visible, visible to the world, that there's an alternative way to live and be in this world, one that is based on God's love. And in other words, there ought to be some difference between how a disciple of Jesus Christ lives and how people who aren't disciples live. There should be a difference. It's like that city on a hill, that's you don't put a lamp shade. I mean, you don't cover up a lamp so you can't see the light. The light is meant to be shown. And so, one thing that I have thought a lot about, particularly my own situation, is if there is going to be divorce, how can you do it in a way that reflects the love of Christ?
Yeah.
Because honestly, for a lot of people in our society, when a marriage fails or there's brokenness and a couple splits up, often they just both lawyer up.
Yep.
And they go after each other with claws.
Yep.
And everybody suffers. But is there an alternative way? And that's something that I struggle with. Can there be a way of doing it where you still reflect the love of Christ? There is still reconciliation. There's still love.
Yeah.
There's still the fruit of the Spirit, where there's kindness and patience and gentleness and self-control. Is there a way to do it that reflects the love of Christ? And that's certainly something that I've been taking very seriously.
Well, I broaden that out to my life. Mm-hmm. I mean, is there a way to do it that reflects the love of Christ? I mean, in everything. I really think that that's what this is about, is living in this life of Christ in a way that people see, and am I living in a way, like I said, in my life, period. Whether it's in these circumstances or anything else, am I doing it in a way that reflects Christ's love and his desire for us to love each other?
Yeah.
You sum up the 10 Commandments, right, in 2 ways, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And if we can't reconcile and deal with some people, and here's the other thing, and I've said this before, and so I won't go too big on it, but people fear and shy away from things that are awkward. And they stay away from things.
So
they avoid confrontations. They avoid things that are awkward. And I understand. I'm not saying I don't do that either. But some of the greatest things that you can do in your life often are in awkward circumstances. And some of the greatest ways to grow come through awkward circumstances. And sometimes when we have this anger or frustration with people, or this dividing of ways, it can be awkward and hard for us to navigate it. And so a lot of times we just say, "Oh, I don't even want to address it. I just want to push it to the side." It's like when my kids clean their room, they just throw everything in the closet that's on the floor, right? And so that still is there.
Yep.
And so at some point, I think being a Christian, and I think being a man, for at least me personally, one of the things that's a part of being an adult man is facing things that I'm fearful of, or that are awkward, in a way of grace and dignity, and being able to have some of the tough conversations, because I know that ultimately it's moving me towards what Christ wants me to be.
That's good, yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I haven't done them all really well.
It's extremely hard, and it's painful and difficult.
But it's it ultimately is good, and it will grow you, and it will make you who you are. And so for me, that's what I see a lot here is how can we handle things with dignity and with love and grace and just mercy and truth, and ultimately end up having a peace.
How can we love in the midst of brokenness? How can we reflect the love of Christ in the midst of brokenness? That is a huge challenge.
Well, that's part of the challenge of life, because I think we all have brokenness, and there are things that we all struggle with. So how can we learn to be like Christ as much as we can and still be in the midst of a broken world? So we could go on for a while about this conversation, and it's deep, and we knew that we were treading into deep waters as we said we would look at the Sermon on the Mount, and it's not going to get any shallower anytime soon. And in fact, we're moving towards pretty tough pinnacle here at the end of chapter 5. But if you have anything you want to say or anything you want to share, please definitely add to the conversation. Reach out to us, leave a comment. We'll be more than happy to reply to you and let you know what we think. And as always, we love you, and we really are. We're working every day to love you more and do everything that we can. We're praying for you and everything that you do, and we'll see you next time.